Welcome everybody. I'm Mark Fox, CEO of NetEvents. Delighted all the press from US and internationally can join us today for this session. Solving the Cloud Migration Challenge, top 10 tips for deploying multi-cloud solutions successfully. Our chairperson for today is Brad Casemore, who's the Vice President of Research for Cloud and Datacenter Networking. So delighted that IDC could partner with us. Brad, over to you to introduce the session and your panelists.
Thanks very much, Mark. It's my pleasure to be here today, and I think we've got an engaging session for all of you folks in the audience, and we look forward to questions at the end. Mark's already introduced me, and shortly after I go through a few slides that really set the context, you'll hear introductions from each of our panelists who will tell you a bit about themselves and what their organizations do in the context of today's topic. We have with us Keyur, Jason, Ramesh, and Pere, and as I said, you'll hear from each of them very shortly. I'm just going to present a few slides at the outset, which I think will set the stage for the following discussion. So why does cloud and multi-cloud networking matter? And I think networking is sort of the thing that's come to the fore as organizations have pursued their cloud and multi-cloud strategies. And I think by now we all know that clouds have become increasingly a destination for workloads. Now, they're not just a destination for workloads. Clouds are also represent an operating model, and there's a set of technologies that really work together as part of that operating model in support of those workloads. And cloud is and has become a key means by which enterprises achieve their digital transformation objectives. If you think about business digitization, much of it is being done through cloud. Cloud is a key mechanism for it. One thing that we've found, and we see it in all of our data at IDC, is that the growing adoption of hybrid and multi-cloud IT postures has really redefined the parameters of the data center. And of course, we have it in quotes there. If you think about the traditional data center, it was a fixed on-premises entity. And you had known traffic patterns associated with that. You had known processes associated with that. But as workloads migrate to clouds, it all changes. Changes in terms of the architectures, the infrastructure, and the operating processes that you use to support your business workloads. And to accommodate these increasingly distributed workloads, the parameters of the data center are changing. The data center is now a distributed entity that extends from your on-premises data centers, where you still have a lot of traditional applications, those monolithic 3-tier apps, to public clouds, where you're increasingly running not only modern applications, but also some refactored applications. And that's why how you connect all of this becomes so critical. You can't do it in the traditional way because it's too brittle. It's not sufficiently agile. It's certainly not flexible. Doesn't have the elastic scale of cloud. It's just not the way to do it. So what do we know about organizations' multi-cloud plans? Well, we have some data here, which is a fresh data. It's from a June survey of this year. And we asked organizations over the next 2 years, how would you describe your plans for using multiple cloud providers? One thing that you'll see here is that only 18% said they would use a single public cloud. That means the other 82% are using basically multi-cloud in some form or fashion. You can see that some are using a small number, 11% using multiple public clouds with little to no interoperability, but 72% have plans for some interoperability. Think about the infrastructure implications of that, and they are quite profound, right? So some want to migrate specific workloads and data between clouds, which is fairly ambitious. Some want to be able to have a burstability in pursuit of basically some sort of digital resiliency, right? And they want to be able to do that dynamically. And some want multiple public clouds that are fully interconnected with a unified control and management plane to seamlessly optimize performance and cost. The takeaway here is that, again, 72% are looking at some degree of interoperability on a sliding scale. And that's quite notable. And only 18% are looking at a single public cloud. So what does this mean? Well, another question that we asked in the same survey was, as you look at all of this, as you look at what you're doing in the cloud, cloud edges, and how your strategies are changing, what does that mean for the infrastructure requirements? And you can see that some are doing a shifting of storage and analytics to public clouds to reduce network complexity. They're trying to think about how their data storage and analytics plays with or can be supported by the network, and they're trying to simplify that because it can be relatively complex. We're seeing a lot more adoption as a result of the cloud. If you think about the principles of software-defined networking and intent-based networking, we're seeing a move to more of those mechanisms in the network, and that makes perfect sense. Some, of course, are investing in cloud interconnection services from telcos or cloud hosters, and that makes perfect sense because as you have your workloads in the cloud, you want to be able to optimize your connectivity to the workloads and for the workload consumption at the edge. And that makes perfect sense when you think about using not only the cloud as a repository for your workloads, but using these worldwide cloud networks and interconnection services. And 47% are investing in multi-cloud networking. This is the first time we asked this question in this sort of survey, but I think this is striking. I would aver to say that if we asked that same question a year before, the percentage would have been perhaps 20%, and maybe I'm pushing it a little bit. I'm being a little too optimistic. Multi-cloud networking has moved from a relatively fringe concern to the center of the radar screen at the C-level in many organizations. They're realizing that this is something that needs to be optimized if they're going to fulfill the objectives of their cloud strategies and their digital, basically their digital transformation initiatives. So multi-cloud networking requirements, it has to support those distributed workloads across clouds. It should be declaratively managed, like SDN and of course intent-based networking. It needs to be on-demand, elastically scalable, highly available, and secure. Most of those on-demand, elastically scalable, highly available. These are all associated with. These are basically cloud attributes. Right? It has to be like the cloud. It should include abstractions that simplify networking to and across disparate clouds, because each cloud has its own APIs, its own infrastructure and network constructs, its own services, network and security services, and its own basically service insertion models. So they all operate in a disparate fashion, and you have to find a way to mitigate the complexity of operating across them, because that complexity incurs significant operational costs and other costs as well. And it should deliver the operational agility and efficiency that organizations need. And for that, you need greater visibility and observability that really confer actionable insights. I think this comes to the fore in an unprecedented way as we think about operating this infrastructure, not only on day 0 and day 1, but on day 2 and the rest of the operator's life. We should be able to use that visibility to enable faster troubleshooting and remediation of issues that affect the availability of applications. But you have to move to a more proactive and cost-effective approach here, because we all know that we've gotten used to instant gratification in the world of cloud and web. And we all know that as applications move to these environments, they are more about front-end processes, serving customers, serving employees, rather than back-end processes. Back-end processes are still important, but front-end processes are really where business is done. And you can't have outages that last a significant length of time. So we have to move to a more proactive way of supporting all of this infrastructure. And really, it's an integral foundation, as I said, for the infrastructure, for this digital infrastructure, truly digital infrastructure that we need in the cloud era, supporting the experiences of customers, partners, and employees. So in our view, as we think about adoption, this is from a recently published document that we did, this chart that you're seeing here. We think that it's still early days for multi-cloud networking, but as you saw, almost 50% of respondents now identify it as a strategic need. We think the market will reach more than $2 billion in 2026, and it will grow at a compound annual growth rate of 75% from 2022. Of course, that's where we are today. Very significant growth. You know, some of the early years, certainly as we look at the next year, you're going to see triple-digit growth, but 75% CAGR is certainly significant. We think enterprises of all sizes are candidates for this technology, though the earliest adopters, you know, if you think about the curve of early adopters, early mainstream, and so forth, the earliest adopters are very cloud forward, and they also tend to be multinational organizations. That doesn't mean it's restricted to them. It means that they were the earliest adopters. Obviously, if we think about, there are a number of use cases under this one, which is a sort of generic use case, but it needs to overcome the traditional limitations of the network and traditional infrastructure, IT infrastructure. Those technologies, traditional as they are, can inhibit the realization of cloud and multi-cloud strategies because they just weren't built for this era. You have to be able to look at certain metrics, and I think as organizations think, well, why should I do it? You're going to see lower cost, you're going to see faster provisioning, you're going to see faster time to market, you'll see better operational efficiencies, and you'll also get cloud choice, and that's extremely significant, especially if you think about what's going on today in the world. A lot of economic uncertainty, a lot of M&A. You could have a single cloud as an organization, you acquire another organization, they're using a different cloud, to kind of drive them to the cloud that you've used, your incumbent cloud. Doesn't really make sense because they had good reasons for going to their cloud of choice. If you have infrastructure that can support hybrid and multi-cloud, you're going to benefit from that. And obviously the customer impact is that, you know, really, if the network performs as it can, using this sort of automated intelligence that I talked about earlier in terms of not only day one and, you know, day zero and day one, but day two and ongoing optimizations, it just performs, right? Your users shouldn't know it's there. When they know it's there, something bad has happened. And I think we're going to have a more intelligent network that over time becomes self-optimizing and ultimately self-driving. We're not there today, but that's where we're going. And the good news is it's going to be able to support business outcomes. It's going to support availability, resiliency, and continuous service delivery because of the intelligence that's invested in it. And I think with that, we are through the section. And now I can have each of the esteemed panelists will introduce themselves, tell you a bit about themselves and their organizations. And we'll start with Keyur Patel, who's the founder and CTO of Arrcus. Keyur?
Hi, thanks, Brad. And hello, everyone. My name is Keyur Patel. I'm one of the founders and CTO here at Arrcus. Arrcus is a networking company that focuses on building networking solutions for data center switching, multi-cloud networking, and service provider routing.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Keyur. Jason, I wonder if you could provide a brief introduction.
For sure. So first of all, thank you very much for inviting me to the panel, Brad and Mark. Jason Purvor, I'm the data center transformation and mass migration practice lead for Google Cloud EMEA, which I think means I probably have one of the longest titles, and a trifold card is required to fit all those words in. But essentially what I do is I help organizations to move both the traditional x86, modern x86 across to cloud, which is kind of fairly simple to do, but also the more challenging exotic workloads, whether it's Exadata, whether it's mainframe even. How do we get those to cloud so that people can start harnessing the benefits of the superpowers of cloud?
Excellent. Thank you, Jason. Yeah, there's not only mainframe, but even HPC workloads are moving to cloud now. So a lot of work to be done on that front. And Ramesh, I wonder if you could introduce yourself.
Absolutely. Thanks for having us here, Brad. Ramesh Prabagaran, co-founder, CEO of Prosimo. We are in the multi-cloud networking space, solving two specific challenges for our customers. One is what we call as within the cloud, as workloads move across different regions, across different clouds, and so forth. How do you connect, secure, and make sure the app-to-app connectivity security requirements are met? And along with that is kind of user to app or to the cloud, taking care of secure private access to applications.
Thank you very much. And last but not least, Pere, please introduce yourself.
Yeah, Pere Monclus. I'm the CTO in the Network and Advanced Security Group here at VMware. And as everybody knows, VMware has been in the business of data centers for a while, and now putting a lot of emphasis in modern app transformations, multi-cloud connectivity and security, and kind of making everything work from on-prem to cloud. And as Ramesh was mentioning, from users to apps and from apps to apps.
Excellent. Thanks very much. And I think now we're going to head into the discussion in our first topic. We're going to talk about the technology that's required if we think about hybrid and multi-cloud, and then the benefits that accrue from it. And I think we'll take it as one big topic as we send the questions out to the individual panelists. So let's talk about what is required, and if you use it right, what sort of benefits accrue from the application and use of the technology. And we're going to start with Ramesh. Ramesh, I wonder if you could talk about how you see this this space in terms of the technology requirements, and then talk about how the proper and correct use of the technology can confer significant benefits for customers.
Absolutely. I'm going to switch the order a little bit here, Brad. So I'll talk about the benefits, because that largely dictates how customers are embarking on and adopting multi-cloud. So a couple of examples come to mind. Really large enterprise that essentially chooses the right workload and the right cloud for that workload, right? So inherently highly distributed, multiple business units, multiple engineering teams. Each of them want to pick the cloud of their choice and the region of their choice. And before you know it, the centralized cloud platform team has a multi-cloud problem. That is very different than if you're building, let's say, a business-to-business exchange, and you have, as an enterprise, workloads in one cloud, but because you have to cater to your suppliers downstream and upstream, you have to build connectivity and security requirements to the cloud of their choice. So there you have a problem that just landed on your lap because it's just the nature of the beast, right? And so depending on kind of what leads you to multi-cloud, the benefits are quite different. Some certainly around speed. Cloud has a very famous thing that cloud is all about speed and focus on applications, and networking has always been about performance, reliability, and solid architecture. It's the marriage between the two that makes cloud networking important, where you can operate infrastructure essentially at the speed of applications. So the primary benefits, I would say, are really around speed. Speed of infrastructure, the same as applications. Second would be essentially kind of catering to the cloud elasticity and economics, right? And so those would be the benefits. Now, if you use those as a benefits and kind of crawl back to what does this mean for the technology stack, this is where kind of the layers are important. So you kind of have to think of the problem here in layers, and I'm sure our panelists here will have quite a diverse opinion on kind of the different layers, but we think of it as there's a network layer, and then there is kind of the application services layer, and then there is the core application itself. So if you think of the stack holistically, then certainly kind of the technology pieces will naturally fall into place. And within that, you have kind of what does this mean for networking? What does this mean for secure access, the observability, and kind of the day-end operations as well. That's kind of how I would frame the benefits and the technology stack.
Thanks, Ramesh. And there's no problem starting with the carrot, the benefits, and working back to the meat. So thank you very much for that. Pere, I wonder if we could get your perspective on this question.
Yeah, as Ramesh was mentioning, I mean, at the end of the day, we do cloud. We use the cloud because we want to run apps. And as we run apps, we have to figure out what are the implications of those, right? Traditionally, we thought that the network is about moving packets from point A to point B and monitoring packet loss and latency and jitter and all those things. But if you take the app perspective, then those tend to be a little bit relevant, because as far as they don't affect any app, what's the point of troubleshooting a network if no app is affected, right? So as we move to multi-cloud, now we have to look in multiple directions. First would be what you mentioned in the introduction, Brad, about the operational model of cloud. In terms of apps now can be deployed by anybody, by a BU, by an application developer, and so on. Now, as Ramesh was mentioning, the network brings the resiliency, the monitoring, the connectivity, the element that creates a distributed application. And now we have to figure out what are the implications in terms of identity, what are the implications in terms of security, what are the implications in terms of connectivity, and so on. And agreeing with Ramesh, the network has evolved a lot in the last 10, 15 years, to the point that one would be the network infrastructure connectivity layer with a TCP/IP stack. But that, to a certain extent, is becoming less and less relevant, in the sense that we have to start thinking what users access what apps and what apps access what data in this multi-cloud journey. And this is where he was calling it, if I remember correctly, application services network. I call it multi-cloud connectivity and security, because if you think in this zero trust model, it's almost the layer that matters. It's not the layer on top, but the layer in the middle. That, of course, requires a connectivity layer underneath and the applications on top. And if you think it like that, the interesting aspect on realizing the benefits of these multi-cloud architectures is that we start getting into what I call the business fabric, seeing how we add value to the business value in terms of how users experience applications, how applications get better cost models or more dynamic scale patterns, and how essentially we can have this data anywhere that is needed. So if we think like that, network has to evolve, network is evolving. And again, the fact that we are introducing new layers is not that the previous layers are not needed. The previous layers are needed. They need to work. They need to provide a stable infrastructure. But as we get closer and closer to the app and the business model, the meaning of networking with concepts like zero trust, end-to-end encryption, and so on, change the nature of the problem.
Thank you very much, Pere. And that's a great lead into Keyur, actually, because Arrcus, of course, has tremendous IP and a lot of engineering around a lower layer, specifically layer 3. They've been very involved in routing. And I wonder, Keyur, if you have a slightly different take on this, or whether you agree with what the two previous panelists have said.
No, I couldn't agree more, Brad, with Ramesh and Pere on this. Look, there are a number of benefits of moving applications to the cloud, right? Application performance increases dramatically with multi-cloud in a number of ways, right? You can start building fabrics. You can start focusing on fabrics that can remove hairpinning. Furthermore, cloud provider backbones are typically known for low latency, very high performance throughput, and more importantly, extremely low jitter, which now with cloud participating at the edge networks or edge computing becomes very interesting, as you can move applications seamlessly across these different points in the network. But then again, to make these applications move and get the experience that we've been talking about, network is going to be the key. And we actually see this as an evolution of networking, delivering particularly applications in multi-domain areas that will span from edge to cloud to multi-cloud in a secure and a very predictable fashion, right? We inside Arrcus like to think this is actually an evolution of networking to networking 3.0. Now, if you think about networking 3.0, this is going to be all about end user experience, meaning the applications, regardless of where they are deployed, you have to cater to their experience and make sure at the end of the day, you get the application experience that you're looking for. And to that point, you're going to see networks evolve, seamlessly building end-to-end from multi-cloud to on-prem hybrid in a very secure, programmable manner. You can see the fabrics evolving to support deep analytics. More importantly, best of breed networking functions will be seamlessly integrated in the fabric as you start to see this networks evolve. So I think this is the great time for networking, as well as you start to see cloud evolve and more applications migrate towards cloud. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Keyur. And Jason, you actually work for a cloud. So I wonder if you have, being the sort of inbound point where many of these workloads are actually destined to arrive. I wonder if you have a slightly different perspective.
Yeah, for sure. I think, well, I have to say, I have to agree with all the participants today. And I think there's a couple of things that really kind of come out of this. I think the first thing is around selection of multi-cloud. I mean, there's a definition, I think, also that's required here. So multi-cloud can include an on-premise cloud, can include a hyperscaler, can include an industry cloud, which is a fairly new term, but I think we're increasingly seeing that crop up. And in addition to that, we also have what we call sovereign cloud, which is basically that the data will always reside in the country of the customer's choice, and it'll have local support engineers that will speak in the local language. So really providing a rich and diverse destination for applications. And there's a couple of other interesting things came up. So around the versatility of the network to have layered on it additional value-added services. So one thing that kind of springs to mind is that just last month we repelled the largest DDoS attack in history. I think we were up to 46,000 requests per second at one stage, and that was sustained over a period of time. And using technology we call Cloud Armor, we were able to repel that attack and show no detrimental effect on the customer's application. I think that this is part of a trend that we are kind of pushing forward, which is this idea that the security and protection should be almost an invisible shield. Customers shouldn't know that they're, accessing underlying architectures. They shouldn't have to see password requests all the time. There's this kind of zero trust, but at the same time, it's kind of zero friction. I think that that's quite an important trend. The network has a big part to play in terms of that. One of the other things that we talked about was through multi-cloud, this idea that you have an ability to choose best of breed. And I think that absolutely is where we see a lot of activity going on at the moment. In particular with Google, what we see is inbound. A lot of customers are coming to us because we have a very rich heritage in data. And I talk often about this idea that we are able to exploit data to build better services, to provide better customer experiences. And this is part of a model that I've been building. And all models are useful, or all models are wrong, but some models are useful. A model I've been building is this idea of the comet model, where you start with consolidation, which is where you're staying where you are and constantly iterating your on-premise environment. Then you cross the latency gap and get to cloud, and then you get the ability to optimize your workloads and compress your workloads. Then modernization, then exploitation of superpowers of cloud. And what I mean is AI and ML and analytics, which are really driving rich new experiences for customers. And then finally, transformation, where you're standing up services and ripping them down on a global basis with a few lines of code. And this is kind of the trend that we're seeing. People are moving across that curve and choosing the cloud that best suits their workload along the way. And I think where we're kind of seeing a lot of traction is around that data component, where we not only can process AI and ML workloads on our own platform, but we can actually provide customers with solutions that enable them to explore the data they have on other clouds as well, whether they be Azure and AWS. We have an ability to basically bring that back, and without having to bring the data, but actually do the analytics remotely and then orchestrate that back into Google Cloud to provide the ultimate result. And they're the kind of trends I think that we're seeing, which customers are looking for, is the freedom to choose the cloud of choice to build their applications on, but the ability to exploit the superpowers of cloud, AI, ML, analytics, collaboration on multiple different platforms.
Yeah, thanks very much, Jason. Yes, we see a similar thing in our research, where organizations express an interest in using multiple clouds for exactly the reasons that you cited, right? There, you have separate groups, ships in the night, operating within the organization. You have an express strategy to do that, right? In terms of, we either want to avoid cloud lock-in, or we always want flexibility and choice. Sometimes it's, it's just, I want to run in the optimal environment, right? And that means different clouds. And sometimes, as I said, you have organizations that are thinking ahead and saying, I may engage in M&A. I want to be proactive about this. So I think all of those are relevant, and all of them are coming together to create the topic we're talking about today.
So basically, the other aspect that I wanted to touch is that from a technology point of view, we've created a very fragmented landscape.
Yeah.
I mean, if you think in the old days, we defined TCP/IP and OSI and the 7 layers and things like that. And over the years, we got into kind of a standardized way to have an end-to-end principle and communication models. Now you look at today, we have from logical switches and network virtualization in VMware, we have VPCs, we have VNets, we have other constructs, we have service meshes, we have end-to-end zero trust with certificate management, we have different models for API security and so on. So in a way, we've reverted back to kind of vertical integrated models. And now the clouds are becoming kind of the old big vertical machines of the past, which each of them is using a different technology. And because of that, networking is seeing a resurgence of how to reinvent networking in a way that we come back to the interoperability principles of the early days. And now we are tackling these at 2 levels. One would be at the quote unquote at the transport level, the other would be at the application level. But if you think the fact that we have to solve those problems and the fact that we are discussing about inter-cloud networking or user to app networking, services networking, whatever names we may want to do, it shows the point that we've reverted to a very protective and walled garden environments from a networking point of view. And that was never the intent of networking. Networking was always supposed to be a horizontal platform. So maybe the reflection to do is as we evolve our multi-cloud models and networking models and identity models on this multi-cloud, is to think how the industry transformed from the 70s and 80s, that we had lots of technology, into the 90s with more standardized technologies. Now we are back to the lack of standardization. So maybe I would pose the question, what do we do for this multi-cloud networking to be easier than what it is right now?
Yeah, and the standards bodies really have struggled with not only the pace of change and the need to move at a fast pace, but they've struggled with a lot of the more software-driven models, you know, and that's why I think you see enterprises say, I want simplicity, because this is inherently complex, Pere, as you just said. So makes sense. And sorry, Ramesh, but
yeah, no. I actually agree wholeheartedly with what Pere just mentioned, right? And actually with what Keyur mentioned as well. So we have essentially the notion of a business fabric that we start with. And then as you start to go down the stack, so to speak, to figure out what is needed, you need a healthy network, a solid architecture, and at the same time, you need to focus on kind of what is it that you're serving on top, right? So the constituents you're serving are still kind of users, applications, and services. So people invariably start there because that's the focus on the cloud. But without a solid foundation underneath, you can mess this up pretty badly, right? Case in point, we had a head of infrastructure tell us this, that, hey, I can go get a bunch of 20-year-olds from kind of fresh grads from colleges, and I can automate the heck out of it in the cloud. But if I look under the hood, it will be a mess because it will not be built on solid foundation. Networking will not be hygienic, and before you know it, there's proliferation, there is cost and whatnot, right? While at the same time, if I go get like a solid, back to what Pere mentioned, like a 70s born in the network world, a solid architecture and so forth, then you don't get the speed and the automation and the orchestration and day-end operations and the time to capability, right? So what is required essentially is that healthy mix, bringing both the agility that's required for the cloud and at the same time bringing that solid foundation, right? And this is where, given the pace at which things are moving, nobody takes a step back to figure out how do I make two things interoperate. I mean, case in point, just take two very simple clouds, right? We have Jason from GCP, take two regions from two different clouds and connect them together. You can easily find just a quick Google search, you can find like 7 different ways of doing this, and there is leave alone standardization, figuring out what the right approach itself is a big challenge, right? And this fundamentally is the problem that we see many of our customers grapple with, right? So they want to move fast, but there is no notion of one common architecture. Leave one, even if there were 4, I think you can at least pick from that, right? But there aren't even those 4. There's quite a bit of those architectures that customers have to deal with.
Yeah, and it's having to do those sort of customizations and hacks in order to achieve your goal. We're already trying to move beyond the technical debt that's behind the firewall in on-premises environments, and now there's this danger of kind of technical debt 2.0 in these clouds between clouds. So I think these are all great points. I think we're going to move on to segment 2, which is a two-parter. We're going to have 2 questions, and the first one is, let's talk about critical success factors, and specifically when we talk about critical success factors, I'll be a little more specific. We're going to talk about assessing your requirements. How do organizations assess the requirements? Because understanding your requirements is really essential to success. Keyur, I wonder if you could kick this off.
Sure. So there's this well-known saying, Brad, that goes, it's very easy to get started in cloud, but it's extremely hard to maintain yourself in cloud and multi-cloud environment as your dependencies to the cloud and cloud providers grow with time. And so for enterprises and businesses looking to transition to cloud, there are critical factors that they should be thinking about. First and foremost, I like to think about is application user experience. What kind of applications are you moving to cloud? And how do you build fabrics? How do you build the networking fabric there? I mean, you're looking for just a fabric across single cloud, multi-cloud, hybrid on-prem. What are you looking to build across? And how do you build a fabric that gives you low latency, high performance, low jitter, scale, secure, right? Networking fabrics that spans end to end. That's first point I would like to say in context of end user experience. Then how do you keep the cost down, right? As you start to look at multi-cloud, your egress cost keeps on growing. And how do you sort of go around and work that cost down? Folks here have talked about openness, which is interoperability and reduction in complexity. Keep your networks simple as you build overlays, but how do you make them open, somewhat standards-based, right? No closed-knit networks where you have your own orchestrator, in some sense, just managing set of devices that are just known to you. How do you evolve to a point where you can build a complete open standards-based fabric, if you will? Cloud is also incentivizing, different clouds, is also incentivizing the users to use private links. How do you sort of work around that? How do you have your critical applications use that versus your non-critical applications that you're migrating into cloud, use internet as a connectivity and build an overlay? So how do you sort of have fabrics designed that can exploit both the use cases and keep redundancy in mind? So one region fails, you should be able to migrate everything to another region very quickly, very efficiently. How do you make networks adapt to that? Those kind of failures. And Jason said it very nicely earlier that, the benefit of cloud is that it gives you an underlay, and it essentially makes the underlay invisible from a networking standpoint, so that the enterprises can deploy applications in the cloud and just focus on building networks that matters to them the most, and not worry about speeds and feeds, compute, processing power, so forth and so on. And how do you sort of stick to that principle as your application migration sort of grows? And last but not the least, look, you've given your underlay to the cloud. You in some sense handed off your crown jewel back in the day that used to be speeds and feeds and pipes, and therefore inherent security that went along with it, right? So how do you make this far more secure on top of the network that is shared and could get compromised in a way that is not in your hands, right? How do you maintain the control at the same time? How do you unleash the fabric with best of breed services? So these are some of the key, I would say, or main factors from a network standpoint that enterprises as well as applications moving towards the cloud, I would think should be thinking about.
Thank you very much, Keyur. We're going to call on Pere now. Pere, how do you think enterprises should frame the requirements? How should they go through an accurate assessment of exactly what they need in this context?
I mean, at the end, it's back to what we were saying. Because of the complexities that we have to go back to principles. And if you remember in the early days, basically an IP address meant many things. So now the question is, how do we translate into a multi-cloud strategy that concept? And now we should generalize it in the form of identity. Now, what kind of identity models you're going to have across clouds? Back to Keyur's discussion, how to take back the crown jewels away from the cloud providers, right? We cannot take back the IP connectivity because that's foundational aspect of connectivity for the cloud provider. But to take control of security, labeling, segmentation, things like that, now we can do it at the identity level. Identity could be a label, could be a tag, could be a certificate, could be many things, could be a risk score. But in these critical success factors, I think thinking what was fundamental from the networks of the past and translating it to the multi-cloud future, I would say identity as a starting point across the layers, and then from there building the strategy towards what does it mean for each enterprise to be multi-cloud. That's number one. Maybe the second one is understanding that enterprises are a collection of things that have lived over periods of years. So it's easy to say, yeah, sure, let's define the new identity model for multi-cloud. But back to Jason's point, what about HPC? What about mainframes? What about bare metal Oracle databases? What about virtual machines? What about serverless functions? And now is how to figure out the cross-generational possibilities in a way that these identity models translate across points in time. And those would be the two critical elements. If you get that right, then back to Ramesh, pick your poison, or maybe multiple technologies, multiple solutions. But if you get the identity identifiers model wrong, then stitching everything together is very hard.
Thanks very much, Pere. And Ramesh, I wonder if we get your perspective.
Absolutely. So having kind of worked with a few customers on different stages of their journey, I would say the success factors largely depend on where the customer is in their cloud adoption cycle, right? So if we are talking about those enterprises that are like early to the cloud, then they're trying to build network highways. How do I go from, let's say, on-prem to cloud, single region, multi-region? Maybe there's a sprinkle of one more cloud in a different region, but I'm largely looking at building those network highways. Those network highways have to be fast, reliable, elastic, and at the same time, I should be able to operate them fairly quickly. Now, once you go past the couple of regions, maybe 20, 30 VPCs and whatnot, then the requirements start to change quite a bit. We've seen kind of scale come into the picture quite a bit. There are requirements for kind of time to resolution, hence a good observability stack so that you can kind of debug problems a lot faster. So time to capability starts to bubble to the top as you start to look at scale. Now, if you go past that point, and we've seen a few customers actually that have kind of figured out how to do this really, really well over the course of a few years, then your requirements start to be very different, right? It is about, back to what Keyur mentioned, how do I do private link to a PaaS service? How do I bring my SaaS in and provide private access to that? How do I have more modern mesh connectivity? The other day, we had a customer say, I have a serverless function. How should I even start thinking about networking for a serverless function, right? That function comes and goes. I can't stage something up, pin up a tunnel and have that persist. I just can't do that, right? And so the adaptation of the network to kind of these modern workloads, whether it's a serverless function or a mesh or any of these new PaaS services and whatnot, those become the care about. Right? So largely, I would say it depends on where the customer is in their journey. Whether we call this a recession or not, I think customers are definitely feeling the pinch on cost here. So once you move past that initial phase, cost control, cost governance, and the ability to look deeper into what is causing that bloat becomes extremely critical as well. So all of those things I would say are the care abouts for later stages. Early stages, certainly it's a lot about reliability, automation, speed, and so forth.
Yeah, no, those are all great points. And it's interesting what you say about serverless, right? Because that is where, you know, things like service mesh and also things like eBPF come into play because it's more of an event-based type of in-kernel technology. There's quite a bit of happening there, but of course, it means more complexity. So there you go. Jason, I wonder if you could tackle this and let's get a perspective. I know you see a lot of customers come to you and they're actually looking to implement. So you can tackle the requirements as well as, what sort of guidance you give on implementation.
Yeah, for sure, Brad. And I think all the points made today kind of building up to something, which is, I think there are a couple of things that you really need to consider as you're taking the leap across the latency gap from on-premise into cloud. And one of the key ones is executive sponsorship, and having a really clear why you're doing this. Often, what we see is that, and sadly, a lot of migrations are unsuccessful or don't have an impact in terms of satisfying business requirements, because they're taken from the perspective of, I've got a data center, I'm going to move the data center to the cloud without really considering the optimization and the way in which applications speak to each other. So we see a lot of challenges where customers have moved a number of servers and they end up tromboning between on-premise and in cloud, and end up with a big egress cost at the end of the month and wonder where did that come from. So getting good data is, I think, really important. If there's one tip that I think is really top of mind for me, it comes from having assessed about 400 data centers in a former life, and taking a look at them in detail. A lot of them VMware estates, Pere. And the kind of the quote I have, and Keyur had a great quote earlier, the quote I have is that people with bad data make bad decisions with great certainty. And what I mean by that is that often people are using a CMDB dump, which is nothing more than an inventory of assets, to try and shape their cloud migration journey. They haven't looked at the actual utilization of resources in their data center. So they bring the entropy and the wastage of the data center to cloud and over provision instances that they're paying on a pay-per-use type basis. And that means they're paying more than they should. Now, we've built some tools that help to automate the process using AI to identify opportunities to shrink the bill. But nevertheless, there's nothing better than actually getting good data to begin with. And the other part of that good data is understanding dependencies between different elements of a multi-tier stack or different servers. So if you're going to move a particular server, you want to take a look at what it's talking to and move those in concert. And so that way you end up with a situation, you don't end up with this situation where you end up with these egress costs as it tries to call back home. And I think that's really important to do. The other thing I think is understanding, and I think Ramesh mentioned that where the customer is in their cloud maturity in terms of the journey. If you have teams of people who are used to working with on-premise technologies, perhaps they've got great skills around VMware, for example, and you say to them, we're going to go serverless tomorrow, that's a big leap for them. So, taking the appropriate steps to get to cloud and potentially through cloud is quite an important thing. So, solutions that we see customers really adopting very quickly are solutions where they can bring their existing skills and best practices and the tools that they're used to the cloud and continue with business as usual, but immediately take advantage of the fact that there's no latency to cloud native services, so they can start innovating. And getting to those, superpowers that I mentioned earlier. So really being able to connect, taking the VMware estate, bring it as it is, move it into cloud, and then immediately attach it to technologies that give them AI and ML capabilities to really start democratizing their data. So I think that there's a couple of tips in there. I think the key one, though, is start with good data, because people with good data make great decisions with great clarity.
Yeah, thank you very much. And that, I guess, is a discovery process that is often done partially, right? So, they aren't discovering all of what's required or all of the dependencies. They're just getting a partial picture. And as you said, they're basically bring over all the practices and maybe bad habits of their legacy environment to the cloud and just propagating it there. So it's a great point.
And it goes back to just one point I want to make, goes back to what Keyur mentioned, right? So you focus on the application experience. So you start the conversation with somebody in the cloud platform, cloud networking team. They'll say, yes, absolutely, I need this. Then naturally this gets to do you know where your applications are? Like, can you discover that for me? Yes, let's start there, right? And before you know it, you're like 2 steps back, and then you're slowly crawling your way back into the conversation. So kind of thinking holistically about where do these assets live, all the way up to how are they interconnected, all the way up to how do I then start to improve that with the data is really what's going to move the needle.
And let me add to that, actually, Ramesh, you make a really good point there. So I think the other thing that when we're talking, as we talk about multi-cloud, one of the things that I have an opinion on, whether that's a Google opinion or mine is subject to conjecture, but that is that if you're going to move a workload to cloud, in my opinion, it's far better for you to replicate that workload across multiple regions in one cloud, as opposed to across different clouds, because you end up with this cost of complexity, that you end up with 2 control planes to look after one application. And it's far easier to do a failover between one region and another in the event of some kind of act of God or black swan event that occurs with one data center. And we've had this, right? I mean, whilst we have Google has site reliability engineering, and we try to break things in advance to try and fix them. We have situations, for example, in the UK where that we had record temperatures and it knocked out some air conditioning, and we had to turn down some servers in order to prevent them from dying. And customers were impacted where they hadn't replicated their data across multiple regions. And so there's a case for, as you think about reliance and resilience of the application itself, is planning for, what events should we be thinking about as we move to cloud, and how we're going to protect ourselves and the experience of our users in the event of any kind of catastrophe that might be occurring on a global basis. And we see this also, one of the things we're also seeing quite in particular in Eastern Europe is a lot of companies looking to move their data centers to other regions in order to protect themselves against, at this stage, rocket attacks, unfortunately.
Yeah, there's been that's a particularly dire circumstance. I'm certainly not denying that it's happening. It certainly is, but there are a whole constellation of factors, including that last one, that have led during the the years, and we're hoping to be in a post period right now, to a greater enterprise emphasis on digital resiliency across this cloud landscape. And you've just illustrated that the problem just seems to be compounded as we go forward. So it's a problem that enterprises need to solve, they want to solve, and it's high on their list of strategic priorities. Thank you. We're going to move into the next segment of the discussion now. This is the risk and reward section, a very important discussion. And I think we want to tackle this in terms of the obvious risks, the risk of not doing it right, the risk of not doing it at all, and then the rewards from being able to do it properly and being able to execute on it. And we talked about many of the challenges, we talked about many of the key technologies, we talked about some of the potential pitfalls, but now let's talk about specifically about risks involved in this journey. And I think there have been some mentions of some of the issues already, but I wonder if we could delve into them in a bit more detail here. And we're going to start with Pere. Pere, you could come at it from the reward first or the risk, but let's sometimes I saw earlier we had the carrot put in front of the stick, but if you want to talk about risk and reward in whatever order, that'd be great.
Yeah, maybe let's start with the good news. Let's start with the reward. So if you think at the end, we want to realize what before you were calling the operating model that cloud brings, right? This immediate gratification, this instant provisioning of the infrastructure. But maybe the first question is, who gets that reward, right? Traditionally in enterprises, we would have from application owners and line of business to infrastructure teams. Now, if you think the reward of the notion that I have a developer that through a CI/CD pipeline realizes some value right now, it's the one that is reaping off this reward, right? It's like, how do we bring a level of agility to the enterprise that with traditional operating models was hard to achieve? Now, if you think that's the obvious reward, right? It's like, I want this app to be deployed right now. Now, with this comes a lot of risks. And the risks tend to be in terms of, am I compliant to some sort of security standard? Am I doing the right thing? Am I exposing data? I'm doing lots of things that as a developer, I don't really care. Now the question is how somebody else that is not me reaping off the reward is going to take care of those risks through the cloud operating procedures that we may have underneath. And that's kind of the chicken and egg problem. Now, if you make an analogy, I always like to use the fact that imagine that I want to buy a car for myself. I go to the dealer, I check the car, I check the specs, I try it, I like it, I buy it. And if when I'm using it, I'm enjoying it or not, I did the choice, I bought the car, I have to live with my decision. But now I have a 16-year-old daughter that is learning to drive. So now I have to buy a car for her. What I look into the car is different from what she expects from a car. So now, if you think it like that, the risk and reward, it's almost the same. It's like the user that is going to reap off the benefits and the reward of this cloud operating model is the application owner or the folks that want to create faster technology to bring more business value to our enterprises. But the operators and the ones that have to deal with the consequences of bad choices, they are not the same that created that value that reap off the reward. So now the question is how to get a proper balance, in the sense that at the end, we want to introduce networking technologies, security technologies, and so on, but not at the expenses of breaking up the reward that you get on this multi-cloud transformation. At the same time, you want the reward without not being exposed to security problems. So this is kind of the tension that we are experiencing. Now, the moment you take it into a multi-cloud world, and I'll agree with what Jason was saying before, now imagine that you want to have this reward of agility with the minimization of the risks from security, compliance, and exposure, and so on. And now you have to do it across 5 clouds. Like, good luck with that. So when we think in terms of clouds as the recipients of all these layers of technology that we have to take care, now what we get is an explosion of technologies and things to realize in terms of the automation and the reward and the risk management. Now, instead, we could think it in a different way. Right now, we are thinking we have Cloud A, Cloud B. What if we would think I have existing apps and modern apps? So now, if you focus on the apps and the type of apps, suddenly you have only 2 types of apps. The existing ones focus maybe more on an IP-based infrastructure and deploy it on existing kind of more traditional IaaS premises. And you have modern apps more at the PaaS layer, serverless layer, and so on, that they have a different type of identity and connectivity models. If you think it like that, you went from 5 clouds to manage to 2 operational models to manage. And now you can start creating multi-cloud architectures that are more coherent and more homogeneous than just focusing bottoms up cloud by cloud. So that's why when I always consider the risk reward, always factor how do you want to bring agility, resilience, security, and compliance to your enterprise, and who reaps off the reward and who takes care of the risks, and now figure out the boundary conditions and the operating model between those 2.
Thank you. That's an excellent way of systematizing it and thinking about it structurally in terms of roles, responsibilities, and of course, ultimately the benefits that come out of the end of the process. I wonder if we could now maybe Keyur, it'd be great to get your perspective on this, in terms of your customers and their risk and reward calculations. I wonder if you could take us through that.
So Pere summarized it very nicely and explained it pretty in a pretty great way. Look, networks, the obvious rewards from a networking standpoint is the networks are going to become invisible. So you as a business entity will get a chance to focus on your core business strengths, that is moving applications. And then Pere talked about which applications should you consider and why. We've heard very interesting use cases from our customers come by and say, hey, we want to have certain applications move, but we want you to sort of replicate what is on-prem in the cloud, like to some extent what Jason explained. And there are both rewards to that, in sense that if you do that, it reduces your cost, your operational cost, your cost to educate your teams sort of eases out, but there are inherent risks if you don't do it well, if your networks aren't designed well, like Pere said, if it isn't inherently secured, if you have a close-knit network that you're building with a single vendor, you now have an option of multi-cloud, but you are beholden to single networking vendor, if you will, or any vendor solution that you've been deploying. And so there are inherent risks in how you design this. I think architecture is going to be the key from a risks perspective that you need to watch out for. Security is another thing that's going to be super important. How do you sort of enable best of breed networking functions in the cloud as you start to build such an architecture or migrate applications to the cloud to facilitate and for that the architecture that you're building? So I think there are risks and rewards that folks need to watch out, particularly when they are designing the networks in context of moving applications to the cloud. Yeah.
Thank you very much. And I'll just go across the screen here and we'll go to Jason next. Jason, I wonder if you could touch on this topic.
Yes, I think there are a lot of rewards of moving to the cloud, and we touched upon some of them already. There is one that really springs to mind is that actually cloud can improve your security posture. You know, part of the reason I say that is that when you think about it, hyperscalers are literally spending billions. Their budgets are billions to protect from the server all the way up to the outer reaches of the network. And those budgets are defending against things like the DDoS attack I mentioned earlier. So, and protection and security are a big part of it. So I think the fear of security and also then compliance challenges have largely been solved by the hyperscalers. So in particular, when you look at, for example, the sovereign cloud, that solves the fact that people need to retain data due to regulation in certain countries. But there are some other rewards as well of crossing the chasm, as it were. I think the one of the things that strikes me is that cloud offers an ability to get freedom. So one of the things that Google we're very proud of is the fact that we brought Kubernetes to the world and gave it away for free, and so everybody now uses Kubernetes in order to improve their risk posture, improve the portability of their application. So you get freedom to move your workloads across different clouds, and with Anthos, you get an ability to manage across different clouds and take some of the complexity out. There's actionable insights. You know, AI and ML are really one of the things that customers are seeking from cloud, I believe, is not just cost reduction. I think right now there's an imperative that people want to get rapid cost reductions by compressing their estates, and cloud offers a really good way of doing that. And that's an ability to kind of survive in the current financial morass. But what you want to be doing then is to basically building ready for spring, when eventually these headwinds move past us, an ability to then grow very quickly. And in order to do that, you need to be kind of exploiting AI and ML to basically create new services and deliver those. So innovation at scale and at speed becomes something that's really potent. And to give you an example, we have a retailer who closed down their shops. Of course, they had to under law, but within 2 weeks, they'd stood up a curbside collection service with an app using largely serverless technologies, net new, in order to basically serve their customers. And so people could literally walk up with their smartphone, scan a barcode and pick up their shopping and have it paid for without any human interaction and without breaking any of the laws. And it's that agility and ability to move with the markets that cloud offers the opportunity to take advantage of. And the final thing I'd say also is that sustainability. Google, we're very proud to be the cleanest cloud in the industry. We are, by virtue of workloads moving to Google Cloud, they become carbon neutral. And by 2030, we're looking at being carbon free. And so meeting the challenges, the big challenges that the world has, is something that we're very focused on doing as well.
Thanks very much, Jason. And you're right, sustainability has become certainly with not only the deleterious effects of fossil fuels, but the cost. I think there's going to be near-term and long-term focus on sustainability. So it's a great point. Ramesh, last but not least on this topic, I wonder if you could give us the wisdom of your perspective on this one.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And everybody has made like excellent points here, right? Especially like Pere's kind of two operating models as opposed to looking at 5 clouds. The quality of the conversation changes quite a bit when you approach it from that standpoint. And the only thing I want to add is the nature of the beast with cloud networking, multi-cloud networking is apps move first, data moves, and then the network is usually somewhat the last ones to come along, right? Whether folks want to admit it or not, which means inherently you're under the gun to make a decision as an enterprise and an owner of this network infrastructure. Now you can approach this in one of two ways. You can have like a safety blanket of sorts. So build highways, secure those highways, and kind of have that as basic hygiene, so nobody's putting a gun to your head, or be kind of involved in the early discussions, have kind of an architectural blueprint so that as things move to the cloud, you're not getting dragged along, but rather you're bringing the right infrastructure into the mix, right? And those that embark on the journey in the latter way, which is kind of be part of that architectural blueprint for how to do things right and whatnot, we've seen the level of hygiene, the level of automation, the speed at which they can operate, the cost control that they can have is way, way, way better, right? And so the only thing I would add is essentially just balance out the risk reward here with an element of time, be involved in the front end, so to speak, and then kind of the rest of it will just follow. Otherwise, all great points made by the panelists here.
Yeah, thanks very much, Ramesh. And I'm glad you kind of called out the elephant in the room regarding the fact that networking has always been the last one of the party. It's almost like you have a stool and you forget that third leg, right? And you have to kind of latch it on later and measure it and attach it to the stool. I always think that it's unfortunate because when you think about it, certainly in the context of the digital world we're in now, it really is the nervous system for what organizations are doing. It's absolutely critical. Thank you. And now we're going to move on to our next stage of today's presentation. This is roundup and conclusions. And I think we're a bit pressed for time. So I think what we'll do with the roundup is we'll ask each of the panelists to provide a key takeaway and also 2 tips in this multi-cloud world. And each of us will take 2 tips, and we'll start with Keyur. You can provide the 2 tips, and then anything that you think we maybe haven't touched on or you'd like to restate for the audience before we move on.
I'll piggyback. Thank you, Brad. And I'll piggyback on what Ramesh said earlier. Look, to migrate applications in the cloud, networking is the key. Network is the key. And to that point, please choose and design your right network fabric that meets your requirements as an enterprise. And I think everything else will fall in place alongside with it pretty well. Make sure it's invisible while it's invisible, and in cloud with an underlay that is provided. Please make sure it's scalable and secure. And last but not the least, to reduce the operational cost and complexity, I'd say automation is critical to that point. Having an openness in orchestration systems that can control multiple networking functions, best of breed in the industry, and helps you build that fabric that you're looking for is going to be super critical for your applications to scale in cloud. Yeah.
Absolutely. Thank you very much. Jason, I wonder if we could get your perspectives here.
Well, I think I made the point earlier, start with good data. And in order to get good data, I think that it's important to say that there are free tools freely available from hyperscalers, which not only provide that asset inventory, but also automate the process of understanding the actual utilization characteristics of resources. So we can right size and provide cost savings, which reduce power and cooling costs, but also reduce the cost of operations. And also identify those dependencies so that you don't end up with the tromboning and the egress costs rising very rapidly once you've moved to cloud. One point I didn't mention was this idea that as part of the more exotic or deeper legacy that we deal with, VPCs that are able to support existing IP ranges is actually a really powerful way of helping customers to get to cloud, so they can attach to superpowers. And so, Google has built its own global network. It serves billions of users daily. We all use the verb Google to talk about search, and that's just one of a number of services, maps and so on that we serve. So that network and the superpowers that basically underline those are the things that we're kind of offering to our customers, and helping customers kind of build new services on top. Which, so the point I was going to make here is that, first of all, right now in the current market, it's all about cost reductions, getting rid of that power wastage, but then building so that you can basically come back stronger using cloud technologies when the storm does pass.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Jason. Ramesh?
Absolutely. Just keep it to two crisp, quick ones. One, think full stack. We started the discussion by talking about focus on the network, focus on the app services on top, and then the application. So think full stack and provide a solution that caters to various layers of the requirements. The second would be kind of not just focus on the outcomes, but focus on one or two outcomes that you can control. If you end up optimizing for application experience, cost control, security, and deep observability, you end up getting neither or none. I would pick two that are really critical for the business, for the stage of the game that you are in, and optimize highly for that. And then certainly don't lose sight of the others, but kind of optimize heavily for a couple of care abouts.
Excellent. That's excellent advice. And Pere?
Beyond the ones that have already been mentioned, back to don't forget about the reward. Like, if you forget about why you are doing what you are doing, as you put all these controls, you may break the original reason why you wanted to go to this new operational model. And within this, always keeping the reward in mind is like, think about what person is going to realize the reward. And if you realize that there's an existing set of apps and a set of modern apps, then a couple of tips to make sure that you're starting in the right foot is make sure that your identity models are right, and make sure that you have enough monitoring and troubleshooting elements in a way that you understand when applications are not performing, why are they not performing.
Excellent. No, perfect advice. And I think you guys have taken all the good ones, but I will try to offer some observations on top of those. I think from my perspective, seeing in the survey data on our interactions with enterprise customers is that I think enterprises need to be as proactive about cloud and multi-cloud as they can, especially on the networking front. We've seen that the network is unfortunately often an afterthought or something that is seen as a secondary consideration. Understand that without the network, a modern network, one that's that, as these folks have said, has been modernized throughout the stack and modernized architecturally in terms of the infrastructure pieces and as well as the operational model, you aren't going to get to your objectives. And two, and that goes back to what Pere said about looking at the ultimately what it is you want to achieve. And two, I would say, understand that even if you aren't multi-cloud today, there are likely occasions where you will need to be multi-cloud, and you'll need to be able to have the pieces in place to give you that. Basically, you need choice, you need flexibility, and from choice plus flexibility comes resiliency. So I think it's very important, again, to be able to be proactive and to plan in advance, even if your current requirements may suggest that you don't urgently need this capability. I think you will need it in the future. I want to thank all of our panelists today. I think we got some excellent perspectives on the topic, and I want to thank today's audience for joining us. I hope you got a lot out of today's discussion.